What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we have got our Week 10 fantasy wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. So make sure to tune in. And in the meantime, if you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us, shooting us your questions there as well. We'll do our best to answer them. And also check us out online at alldaypigskin.com. Sign up for our free newsletter to get access to exclusive content, all those details in the description. But for now, let's get right into it. Before getting into our breakdowns, I want to give you guys a quick word from our sponsors at Overlay Fantasy Sports, who are taking DFS to a whole nother level. And I specifically want to highlight their matchup shop function, which is an absolute blast. In fact, we've been using it since the start of the NFL season because, let's face it, betting on the same old Team A versus Team B can get a little bit stale, a little bit boring. Well, that's not even close to being the case with the matchup shop of Overlay Fantasy, as it allows you to bet on individual player matchups, and it's super simple. Just pick whichever player you think will have the higher fantasy performance. And just like a regular bet would work, check out the spreads, do your research, and then win some money. You can bet on pretty much any single sport that you want, whether it's NFL, golf, MLB, etc. All those options are there. And again, super simple. Pretty much for any single NFL game coming up, you've got a bunch of different matchups that are always updated and added to. So if it's something as simple as just putting a single submission, you can do that. But guess what? If you want to get a parlay going and double up some of those winnings, you can do that as well. So take advantage of this. All of that homework you're doing for your fantasy lineups, let's have that translate to some big time winnings for your wallet as well. So do yourself a favor and check out Overlay Fantasy's matchup shop now. Our first game of the week, we've got the Indianapolis Colts at the Tennessee Titans on Thursday night. And as far as wide receivers that we can comfortably start, it pretty much starts and ends with A.J. Brown of the Titans. Even versus a very tough matchup last week versus the Bears, Brown had a very effective outing, and he essentially proved our point that when it comes to him and Corey Davis, who, yes, he has overperformed this year, we can admit that, but in a tough defensive matchup like it was versus the Chicago Bears last week, it's probably going to be a one-man show at the wide receiver position. And Brown is the guy that we just have more trust in. He's the guy that's been more consistent. So that's the way we're approaching it this week as well. The Colts defense not as imposing as that of the Bears, but they're still an above average unit. So for that reason, Brown is a start and Corey Davis more so a sit. But looking at our other sits here, specifically for the Colts, we've pretty much got the entire wide receiver group here as a sit. And it starts with T.Y. Hilton, who's been banged up these last few weeks, and now returning. He's going to take away targets from Pascal and Pittman. And even last week when these other guys got the targets, they didn't really do all that much with them. But as a whole, this entire wide receiver group for the Colts has underperformed. I don't have confidence for them to all of a sudden turn it around, even versus a good matchup here. Phillip Rivers, way too inconsistent, so I am fading all of these guys in this matchup. Then we've got the Bucs at the Panthers, and maybe going out on a bit of a limb here, but we think that the Bucs will have a better outing versus the Panthers than they did versus the Saints this last week. So assuming that's the case, then I still like all of these Tampa Bay wide receivers, but let's go ahead and rank them at least because it's going to be a tough situation. The addition of Antonio Brown does limit the targets here and the opportunities. As far as which guy I still have as my number one choice, that would be Chris Godwin. Then as my number two, if it's a standard format, I put Mike Evans there. If it's a PPR format, I put Antonio Brown. I think Evans has that higher touchdown upside. He was targeted on several red zone opportunities for the Tampa Bay Bucs last week. So for that reason, that's the way I view this situation. And I do think that the Bucs will have more offensive success versus this Panthers defense than they did versus the Saints. Then for Carolina, I will start Robbie Anderson and I will start DJ Moore. Anderson continues to prove that he is pretty much the best wide receiver that the Panthers have, the more consistent one at least, while Moore, man, he took a huge hit this last week with the return of Christian McCaffrey. But now with McCaffrey looking like he'll be doubtful for this week, I think you can go and start DJ Moore again. I'm going to have Curtis Samuel as a sit, maybe a bit surprising, but a lot of the success he's had can be attributed to ground success, some rushes, some rushing touchdowns. And versus this Bucs defense, it's going to pretty much be boom or bust, long touchdowns for Curtis Samuel through the air. I don't have enough faith in that, so for that reason, I am sitting him here. Next, we got the Texans at the Browns. And for the Texans, you continue to start Brendan Cooks and Will Fuller. Ever since the firing of Bill O'Brien, Cooks has been great, especially in terms of targets. Now, obviously, Will Fuller, I would say, is the safer option. He is the guy that has the higher ceiling. But either way, both these guys have a good matchup versus the Browns. I would call Fuller a low-end wide receiver 1, and then Cooks a mid to high-end wide receiver 2. While for the Browns, I will start Jarvis Landry. Last time that the Browns played, it was in poor weather conditions, lots of wind, not all that high scoring. But now versus this Texans defense that's pretty much been getting trounced since the start of the season, I really like Landry. No Odell Beckham opposite him, and that means he should get more targets. There's plenty of other weapons there, so I'm not all that worried about Landry. Then as far as sits, mainly one name here, Rashard Higgins for the Browns. Didn't get as many targets as we were hoping the last time around, and with the return of Nick Chubb here, there might be a little bit more focus on the rushing attack. So for that reason, Landry, the only wide receiver we want to start for Cleveland. Moving on, we've got the Eagles at the Giants. A lot of names to consider here. So Travis Fulgham, we will start him. We think he is a high-end wide receiver too, but that ceiling will continue to drop once more and more Philadelphia wide receivers return. And this could be that week. Alshon Jeffrey supposedly could make his season debut. If he does, we don't mind playing him versus the Giants. We think he's a safer play than, say, a Jalen Reagor, who, again, could fall in that conversation. A little bit too boom or bust for our liking. But if we do have to rank them, Fulgham is obviously the highest on that list, followed by Jeffrey, then followed by Reagor. Then for the Giants, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton. Shepard is the safer choice, not all that sexy. The upside maybe not as big of a Darius Slayton, who can be a little bit more boom or bust, but both these guys still warrant starts, while Golden Tate is someone that we are fading. He is the odd man out. But overall here, as far as wide receivers, Travis Fulgham would be the preferred option because of the easier matchup. Afterwards, Washington at the Lions. For Washington, even without Kyle Allen, Terry McLaurin is someone you can confidently start. I believe Alex Smith will go to him consistently, so I'm not all that worried about the volume. This is a good matchup as well, so McLaurin, a low-end wide receiver 1 on the week for me. Then for Detroit, assuming that Kenny Golladay does not play, then you're looking at a Marvin Jones and Danny Amendola situation. Jones is that standard type of wide receiver in terms of scoring formats, while Danny Amendola, someone that you could potentially flex in PPR, scoring high-end wide receiver 3. He's going to be volume dependent. Then for Washington, yes, Cam Sims had a big game for them offensively this last week, but with Alex Smith under center, we don't expect the passing volume to be all that high, so that pretty much means McLaurin the only viable wide receiver offensively and for fantasy purposes, so for that reason, we are passing on Sims. Moving on, we have got the Jaguars at the Packers. And as far as wide receivers to start, let's begin with DJ Chark, because even with a new quarterback, Chark had a huge game. And we said that this could finally be the time where talent wins out, because Chark is by far and away the most reliable wide receiver for the Jaguars. And with a new inexperienced quarterback, he's the guy that's going to get the most targets, the most attention. That's exactly what happened. And we think that that will continue to be the case going forward. Now, Chark, tougher matchup here versus the Packers, especially if Jair Alexander is on Chark. So we probably see him as a mid-level wide receiver 2 on the week. But then for the Packers, obviously Devontae Adams playing like the best wide receiver in fantasy. He is a must start, especially versus this awful Jaguars defense. Could very well finish as the #1 wide receiver in fantasy yet again. As far as our sits, Chris Connolly. I think this might be a situation of chasing production. Connolly had a lot of targets last week, but again, I don't want to bank just on that. There are a lot of other wide receivers here, Keelan Cole, Laviska Shenault. So for that reason, I would rather pass on Conley, especially in a game plan that could feature a lot of James Robinson. And then for Green Bay, we assume Allen Lazard will make his season debut here. So if that is the case, we are fading both him and MVS in his first game back. We just want to be a little bit cautious with Lazard. And if he does play, that will obviously take away opportunities from MVS. Then we've got the Chargers at the Dolphins, and we'll start, the big names here. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams for the Chargers. Obviously, Keenan Allen playing like a borderline top 5 wide receiver as far as PPR scoring is concerned every single week. Yes, this is an underrated Dolphins defense, but Keenan Allen should continue to get the volume, so we have him as a start. Then Mike Williams, again, more of that standard scoring wide receiver, but he should see some volume as well. We think this will be a high scoring affair. He's got that touchdown upside, so we like him as a low end wide receiver too. Then for Miami, tough situation with losing Preston Williams, so that means it'll be the Devontae Parker show going forward. We think regardless though, Parker was the #1 wide receiver on this offense, and without Williams now, you're probably looking at high-end wide receiver 2 upside every single week. Next, we got the Broncos at the Raiders, and this is a much better situation for the Broncos wide receivers, definitely. Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, I have both of them as starts. Jeudy the preferred option. Tim Patrick, maybe he wasn't 100% last week, but he salvaged his day with a garbage time touchdown, and we believe that he will only get healthier as the days progress. Not all that tough of a matchup versus the Raiders. So Patrick as a high-end wide receiver 3, someone that you can kick the tires on. Then for the Raiders, again, this is a crapshoot pretty much every single week. If I had to take a chance on someone, it would be Nelson Aguilar. He's been getting a lot of that deep ball attention that the Broncos struggled with versus Atlanta this week. So I'd go with him. Maybe you make the argument for Henry Ruggs with the speed that he has, but I just don't have enough faith in the rookie. That's why I have him and Hunter Renfrow as sits. And then same for KJ Hamler. With Jeudy and Patrick both healthy, I think he is the third option. So just too much of a fall off in my eyes. Then we've got the Bills at the Cardinals. I think this will be a very good matchup as far as the wide receivers are concerned, because it should be a high-scoring affair dominated by the passing attack. For the Bills, I'm going with Stephon Diggs. I'm going with John Brown. If John Brown is nicked up, something like that has happened just because, that's been a storyline this year, then I would put Cole Beasley as a start. But when Diggs and Brown have both been playing, Cole Beasley maybe has been a little bit of an afterthought. That's why I have him and Gabriel Davis as sits. Then for the Cardinals, DeAndre Hopkins, obviously the safer choice. Christian Kirk, a little bit more boom or bust, but he's been getting it done regardless these last few weeks. So we will take a chance on him, probably a better play in standard formats. But either way, both these guys have very big upside in what should be a very high-scoring affair. Then we've got the Bengals at the Steelers. And for Cincinnati, I think this will be a situation where there's only going to be so many viable options versus a great Steelers defense. And if that's the case, I'm going with the 2 more experienced wide receivers in Boyd and A.J. Green. I prefer Boyd, but don't sleep on A.J. Green versus an opponent that he knows very well. I think both these guys probably in the low to mid-level wide receiver 2 category. Then for the Steelers, Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson is the preferred option. And I will say this is very much so dependent on the status of Ben Roethlisberger, who is placed on the COVID list. So he has to clear his next test. If he does not, boy, we remember what last year was without Ben Roethlisberger under center and these wide receivers. So if that is the case, I don't care how good the matchup is. I am sitting every single Steeler wide receiver, but I don't think that that'll be the case. So assuming Ben does play Juju Smith and Deontay Johnson, I think Chase Claypool, kind of the odd man out. And then same for T. Higgins. I would rather sit the rookies in these matchups. Then going to the 49ers at the Saints, we're going to tentatively start Deebo Samuel if he plays, followed by Brendan Ayuk. These are the #1 and #2 wide receivers for the 49ers at this point in time, but they don't have as high ceilings as that of a Michael Thomas and an Emmanuel Sanders. Now, this could potentially change if, Samuel doesn't suit up, or if maybe Kendrick Bourne doesn't suit up and it's only the Brendan Ayuk show, for instance. In that case, we expect a lot of targets for him. So that's a situation that just has to be monitored as the week progresses. Then as far as our sits, it's mainly the 49ers. Richie James, yes, he had a huge outing this last week, but that was a situation where pretty much no other wide receiver was available. Some help is expected to return, so we are fading him here. And then Kendrick Bourne, if the top two names are available, he is that wide receiver 3. Just don't have enough faith in him to be relevant and to get the volume, so we are fading him as well. Afterwards, Seahawks at the Rams. This is pretty simple. You start both of these duos, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and then Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. And I'd probably say that Kupp and Robert Woods have the higher ceiling here because of that atrocious Seattle secondary. This should be a relatively high-scoring affair. I think probably both these teams can get over 30 points. So I think this is a great matchup for the wide receivers. All these guys, at worst, low-end wide receiver ones. Then Ravens at the Patriots. Only wide receiver here that I really am interested in starting is Jacoby Myers, more so in PPR scoring and more so because of the volume without Julian Edelman. Cam Newton has locked in on Jacoby Myers. The other wide receivers, afterthoughts, Damiere Byrd, not even mentioning N'Keal Harry, who has completely disappeared these last few weeks. Then for the Ravens, we've said it before, Marquise Brown, 2 boom or bust. We're seeing that this offense for the Ravens just not as good as it was last year, whether it's people having figured out Lamar Jackson a little bit or his accuracy not being quite there. Marquise Brown just too risky in this matchup, so we are sitting him. And finally, we've got the Vikings at the Bears. And as far as starts here, let's begin with the Vikings. Adam Thielen. You might be surprised not to see Justin Jefferson there, but this is a very tough Bears defense. We said it last week when the Titans faced them. We think there's only going to be one fantasy relevant wide receiver, and we're going to bank on the more experienced wide receiver in Adam Thielen. We're going to sit the rookie in Jefferson. Then for Chicago, Allen Robinson. It's like this every single week. He is the most reliable wide receiver on this offense, and as bad as the play of Chicago's offensive line, quarterback has been, Robinson is still probably the best fantasy wide receiver option in this matchup due to the defense he's facing. And then as far as our sits, we mentioned Justin Jefferson. For the Bears, Anthony Miller, Darnell Mooney, just not enough upside to go around for these remaining wide receivers as far as fantasy is concerned. Foles can only support one fantasy wide receiver, that is Allen Robinson, so we are sitting the rest of the guys. So with that, we wrap up our Week 10 fantasy wide receiver starts and sits. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, along with any other start or sit questions you guys might have? We'll make sure to answer them. And if you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us as the week progresses. Shoot us your questions on there. We'll make sure to answer them as well. And also check us out online at alldaypigskin.com. Sign up for our free newsletter to get access to exclusive content, all the details in the description. But for now, we'll see you guys in future videos.